Okay, this is a review of the Warp website, which is at joinwarp.com. The first thing that jumps out at me is that this rainbow color scheme they've got on some elements works quite well against what is otherwise a plain color scheme. They've got black and white mainly. So I quite like this because it's busy on calm. I generally find that if you want to mix and match different styles, you should do a busy style on a calm style or vice versa. So this rainbow theme would be lost a bit if it were an otherwise busy visual website, but because it's quite plain, quite simple, black and white, the rainbow color scheme really stands out and draws your attention to the things that it should, which are these call to action buttons and this product image. I noticed that there's a subtle gradient on this headline here, so it goes from lighter to darker, top to bottom, and the same gradient can be found on this button up here, lighter at the top, darker at the bottom. So that's quite a nice way to make everything feel a bit more coherent, even across different element types. I quite like that the main CTA here has this rainbow gradient surround, and so does this screenshot. Both of these elements are sort of thematically the same. One is a call to action to say schedule a demo, and one is essentially a demo of the product. It's a screenshot, and so they're both being highlighted by this rainbow surround. I quite like that they've used that rainbow color scheme in roughly the same way in both cases. They're not just applying it at random to things that don't relate to each other. You might have seen this earlier, but if I hover over this call to action, you can see that this rainbow color scheme takes over, which is, I mean, it looks good in the first place, but I quite like that when you're not hovered over it, it's a relatively reserved effect with the rainbow border. When you do hover over it, at that point, the button content itself, the schedule a demo, becomes less important. You're already sort of considering clicking on it. And so having this rainbow color scheme take over like this is quite a nice time to do it, because if you had this rainbow fill applied the entire time, which you might be tempted to do as a designer, I think it would distract from the message of the button. But here in the default state, you've got it against a black background. It's quite calm. It's only when you start to engage with it that it takes over and sort of draws you in. As I scroll down, I realize that there's these sections that each have a theme color, and so this first one's blue, then you've got green here, red, and finally orange. And I quite like how they're essentially taking the colors in this rainbow theme, which you might notice here is also orange, red, if we wait for it to cycle, green and blue. They've taken that rainbow and they've essentially split it into the parts of the product. So this is quite a nice connection. You've got the rainbow that represents the product as a whole, around the button, around the screenshot, and then you've got these four sections that represent parts of the product, and they're using the four colors from the rainbow. So that's quite a subtle, you might not even notice it, but it's quite a nice way to sort of theme the website, make sure that you're representing the product throughout, even with your visual styles. The illustrations here in these sections, they use this gradient again, lighter to darker, so that's a nice consistent theme with even these black buttons up here. But the colors are quite soft. These illustrations are soft. They use these sort of pastel style colors. They use quite soft shapes, where shapes are here. You can see these outlines are quite softened. And down here as well, rounded corners on these boxes. I quite like that because it's a relatively inviting, a welcoming, sort of comforting color scheme and approach to illustrations. And that's probably quite important for a business that is handling an otherwise quite serious and important task, which is payroll. So it's a nice contrast to the idea of the product, and maybe makes you feel a bit better about the idea of using this company to handle that stuff. Makes it seem a bit more approachable, which is a good message to send. As I scroll down here, one thing that acts as a sort of a centerpiece is this animated background. And I reviewed the old version of the Warp website actually, and they had a similar background, but it was a still image, and so they've updated it and made this animated. And I quite like it because it's representing that idea of being at warp speed even better. But it's not too fast. I spoke to one of the designers on this website, and he said they didn't want to make it too fast because it would distract you from the main call to action. So I quite like it's almost this calming effect, even though they're representing warp speed. And it doesn't completely go against the idea of warp speed, because if you were really flying through space, some of these stars would probably be a long way away. They wouldn't be going that fast past you. So I like it. It's relatively calm. It represents an exciting idea, and because all of these lines that the star trails are creating, they're pointing inwards to the center. So it's a very nice eye guiding effect as well. So it's doing a few jobs here. The final thing is that this rainbow button, which you've already seen up here in black with the outline. Down here you've got the rainbow outline, and it changes to a rainbow when you hover over it. But here it's even more effective in terms of the color scheme because it's against this dark background. These sorts of bright colors stand out even more against a dark background just because they're that much brighter. And so having this black background in the sort of final section, the call to action section, is quite appropriate just because this color is going to be even more inviting, even more visually interesting at exactly the right moment.